Hello, this is Dr. Bob Evans, and welcome to our podcast, Parental Alienation from Couch to Courtroom and Beyond. We will discuss the resisting and refusing dynamic, commonly referred to as parental alienation, how you'll know it's happening in your case, and what can be done about it. Parental alienation can cause stress and trauma in high-conflict cases. These podcasts focus on how attorneys and mental health professionals can support families and children. Welcome to another podcast in our series of podcasts. I believe we're about probably podcast 35, 36. I'll have to catch up on the count later on. But welcome, and we're going to talk about taking a little time to slow down, to look beneath the surface of parental alienation, not just the legal battles or the heartbreaking behavior that we know goes on, but the human experience underneath it. Today, I'm joined by Elyse Killoran, an expert in relational life therapy, an approach that helps people see what happens in relationships when truth, empathy start to collapse, and how we can bring it back. Today, we're not here to diagnose anybody. We're here to make sense of what has felt senseless, to bring language and compassion to something that too often hides in silence. Whether you're a parent or professional or someone trying to understand this pain, we want you to leave this conversation steadier, clearer, and reminded that healing, real grounded healing, is possible. So today's guest, as I mentioned, is Elyse Killoran. Understands divorce and family fracture from virtually every angle. She was just 6 years old when her parents separated. Later on, she navigated divorce as an adult when her sons were about the same age, and turned that lived experience into her purpose. Now, a certified relational life therapy practitioner and trauma resolutions coach, she specializes in relational empowerment. Elyse helps people recognize the patterns of pain they've inherited and learned how truth, empathy, and dignity can finally break them. So Elyse, welcome, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Bob.
So Elyse, I mentioned the words relational life therapy. Okay, what is that?
Relational life therapy is a particular form of therapy developed by a man named Terry Real, who got his start in the world of therapy. His name became known as a person who first recognized male depression, that male depression is different than female depression. When women get depressed, we get sad, we turn inward, we're kind of not available. When men get depressed, they shut down or they get very full of anger and rage. So his understanding of the different ways that people respond in couple situations became kind of the template for a whole world of therapeutic training that we call relational life therapy. And Terry on his own is very hard to get, but there's a whole group of us who are bringing this work out to ordinary individuals, working with couples, working with as I said, with individuals who are having challenges in any kind of relationship, whether it's your partner, whether it's your family, any kind of relationship is appropriate for RLT.
So besides what it is, how'd you decide to get involved in it?
Well, I recognized after my divorce, as you mentioned in my bio, I got divorced at the same time that my parents were divorced. And I saw that there were these patterns that I was replaying that my parents had played out. And they were all unconscious. I didn't realize I was doing it, but it made me understand that if I wanted to have a different experience in relationship, I had to be able to see the things that were happening kind of underneath that I had never seen, clear out some of the debris that was kind of carried intergenerationally, and then learn skills that my parents certainly couldn't have taught me. And that's what RLT is about. When we meet with a couple or an individual, we kind of zoom out and look at patterns. We zoom in and look at their childhood and how that connects to their current issues. And then we teach skills that they were never exposed to create a different level of relationship than they were ever able to in the past.
So what makes it different? What makes it different from other kinds of therapies?
Well, one major difference is that we really look at a whole system. So, in a lot of different kinds of couples therapy, for example, the conversation is about, what's your issue this week? Why are you mad at this person? Who's right and who's wrong, and how we can figure that out. How about better communication strategies? That's going to make all the difference. In RLT, we don't look at that level, the level of the behavior or the level of the communication, until after we've looked underneath. What is the system that these two people exist in? And how does one person in the system impact the second person in the system? And that changes everything, because you realize you're not crazy. You're caught in a system that is not working. Um, in the case of parental alienation, there's a system that's actually broken down. And there's a lack of truth, there's a lack of respect, there's a lack of empathy. And so we can like step back and look at that system. Also, there's a gift in that. There's a gift in recognizing that everyone in the system has both power and responsibility. So often someone in a relationship feels like it's the other person. It's all about the other person. If the other person was different, my relationship would be better. And that stance makes it impossible for us individually to make an impact, to change things. So even understanding that someone else's behavior is egregious, how I'm reacting to that egregious behavior is where my place of freedom is. And also, relational life therapists are very comfortable speaking truth to power, calling things out, um, understanding that that's actually the most loving thing, is to speak truth to someone, to help them see their behavior in a way that lets them understand that you're truly on their side. You're not excusing their harm, but you're giving them a way to understand it so they can take responsibility for changing it. So those are things that are different in RLT than from typical couples therapy. And I think it creates a really powerful um, uh, collaboration between the person who's practicing RLT and the person who is coming in for support. We're all working in the same direction, but the person who's coming in gets to really take a lot of power, accountability, and gets a lot of freedom.
And you've worked with couples. Have you been successful working with couples?
I have found tremendous advantage from working with this particular approach. It works faster and it has more impact. Obviously, not every couple gains from this work, but when it does land, people make changes really, really fast. A system looks different kind of from the second or third session.
Hmm.
So I am um, I'm very hopeful when I think about the fact that more and more people have exposure to this kind of work, because I know it's not just changing the marriage that I'm working with in front of me, but I believe it's changing the whole intergenerational loop. It's impacting the children. And that feels like one of the most important things we can stand for as therapists.
So kind of interesting. What's going through my mind is we talk about relational life, relational work. It's with, we'll focus primarily with couples, but I'm thinking of the kind of people that we're talking about in terms of alienation situations. These people have relationships with, obviously the spouse, the mother, or the father of the child. They have a relationship with the child. They have a relationship with the court system. And so they act out the kinds of things you're talking about
Yes,
toward each of those things, whether to their advantage or to disadvantage. We might segue into some more of that in a bit. But so you work with individuals as well in terms of,
absolutely. One of At any one time, I probably am split between working with couples who are at some kind of crisis point and working with individuals who have just either gotten out of a relationship and they're wanting to do it differently next time, or who have not successfully created a relationship and they want to figure out how to do something differently in the future, from people who are totally terrified of ever being in relationship because of things that have happened in their life, and wanting to discover, what they can change inside themselves to make themselves better prepared.
And so what about working with people who've been involved in this concept of parental alienation? That's what my audience primarily listens comes from, whether they're therapists, they're mental health professionals, or um, victims of alienation, or they're attorneys. So have you worked with anybody in this area of dysfunction? Another better word?
I will say, unfortunately, I know far too many people who are caught up in the nightmare and the torment and the despair of parental alienation. Um, Female and male, all different age children. Um,
What are some of the characteristics of these people?
okay. So first, what I can see kind of as an overarching thing is the experience of powerlessness. Like that's the thing that stands out the most. And you'll have to tell me from your experience if I'm being accurate, but this experience of being victimized, having no say over the things that are most important to you, how it affects self-esteem, how it affects kind of on an everyday basis a sense of self-worth, and and a real energy of desperation. People who are coming to me in this situation are typically, there's a sense of urgency, like we have to change this because it's intolerable the way that
Um,
it is.
and they're stuck in a system that moves so slowly, but they want this thing fixed so fast.
Yeah, and that's one of the most heartbreaking things. Is it's almost like the nervous system cannot relax. Like the nervous system is trapped in what therapists would call like a primal attachment panic. So a nervous system on overdrive that never ever gets to relax, that never ever gets to exhale. Um, it feels as if the awareness of this rupture is available, or not even available, is kind of being triggered um, multiple times every day. You can't escape it. So that's another aspect. Would you say
Right.
that's true from
Right.
your research?
Absolutely. Yes.
Um, the the other things that I noticed, this idea of the the way it affects self-esteem. There's a connection between, we say in RLT that whatever's happening in your current relationship is triggering some old unhealed attachment wounds. So much pain, so much like primal pain of being rejected or abandoned, unwanted, unchosen, um, uh, not seen. Those things are so strong in all of these people. That's one of the major things that I can fortunately help with. But those are big things. Does that match?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, these people are victims. Some of them, they didn't know there was a word for it. Some of them didn't know it. Ultimately, what's interestingly enough is that many times they become expert in this whole area because they do their own reading, they do their own research, they start talking around to people and they find out what not only is what it's called, but then also learn about how prevalent this situation is. You wake up one day and all of a sudden your child doesn't want anything to do with you. One of the most dramatic cases that I've had was a mom was dropping her daughter, I believe 7 or 8 years old, dropping her off at school on Friday. Child was going to spend the weekend with the father as a time sharing period. Hugs, kisses, love you, have a nice weekend, see you Monday. Sunday night, mother gets a call from the daughter. I never want to see you again. I hate you. I never want you to see, blah, blah, blah. Mother was absolutely blown away. This came totally out of the blue. And now all of a sudden she's got to deal with this. And now, of course, this plunges her into a whole big legal battle, which all of the things that you're talking about begin to surface, and how, in your description earlier, how depression differs so much between men and women. And you watch that kind of reaction in this situation. It plays itself out just the way you describe it. So, at least one of the things that you said earlier is how different men and women react to, in particular, what you discussed was the depression. And we see that difference sometimes manifested in these alienation cases.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's true. And one of the key things that we use in relational life therapy to explain the patterns in a relationship is what we call the relationship grid, where we say that in when we're triggered, when we're like activated into a survival mode, some of us go up. We call that going into grandiosity, and some of us go down into shame. It's a power dynamic. We all do it at different times. It depends on what the trigger is, but we often have like a very typical thing. I'm either going to feel shame and try everything I can to reconnect with you, or I'm going to feel this kind of energy of I need to make you feel small and I need to be big, and that's the only way that I'm going to feel good. Often, I would imagine from all the different people that I've worked with that have experienced parental alienation, I watch them go back and forth. Sometimes in powerless collapse, into despair, into hopelessness, into a sense of like everything that matters has been taken from me and there's just nothing I can do. And then bouncing onto the other side of fury, outrage. Someone needs to pay. Someone needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
Um, and that oscillation going back and forth is something that we work with in RLT.
Many of them find themselves on the brink of, I'm not going to survive this. I'm just going to give up.
Yeah.
And I mean, many, many, many times I've encouraged people, look, you got to hang in there if you just so that you can give it a shot. Don't give up. The other piece to it is the financial piece too. Um, this becomes a financially draining process. Many people, hundreds of thousands of dollars go into this process, and it just grinds so slowly. Um, it's sometimes almost impossible to sustain this whole thing. So,
Well, and that's a really great point in terms of like the investment of energy, like the demand, not just so there's a financial demand of the investment of energy, but
energetic
like
one.
we have a finite amount of energy in our bodies. So you can't stay in survival mode indefinitely. Like
No.
it will deplete your health, it will deplete your capacity to think, it will deplete you in every area of your life. So um, it becomes absolutely essential to start to focus on self-preservation and self-care, like we would say if someone came to a hospital and they were bleeding, like triage first, like what do we need to do to start making sure that your energy is going to keep you
Yep.
in the best place that it can keep you so that you can be in this, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. How do we help people find some balance, find some emotional regulation, find a way to return to their sense of self-worth, even in the midst of this happening?
Oh. And it just goes on too, because so frequently people they'll go back and forth to blame, and then they'll start going inside and saying, what did I do? What I would have, should have, could have done. And then I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done this. And then they go backlash against the other person. And then the system, and they backlash against the system as well, because the system doesn't really understand. It doesn't, the players in the system frequently do not understand this phenomenon. The lawyers don't understand it. Many, 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 many therapists don't understand it. Psychologists, many don't understand it. They're not trained in it. It's
No.
it's not their fault. They just don't get exposed to it. A very good friend of mine here in Tampa teaches at a university. And I don't know how many times I say this in testimony, but he teaches a clinical psychology program, PhD level psychology. They don't even say the words parental alienation in an entire PhD program. And so you get out as a clinical psychologist, you're practicing, and you don't know if you don't know if you don't know it, you can't find it.
Absolutely.
So,
And that not having no one understand
ah,
is, you feel crazy. You feel as if
oh,
you're the only one with the whole world facing against you. I mean, most of us can't function if we think one person is not on our side, but like this is a multiplicity of that from every direction. The loneliness, the yes, the questioning of your own sanity, being gaslit by every different side of this, and especially the child that maybe now doesn't even acknowledge the memories
right.
that you know that child had.
Well, to add insult to industry, you'll go to court, and very frequently in the court, they'll say that basically the child is behaving this way. There must be a good reason for it. You must be guilty. So they blame the victim. And it's interesting, in parental alienation, we blame the victim. What used to be in domestic violence was the same thing. They would blame the victim of the domestic violence. Now, of course, that's shifted to a great extent. Comment about the child, everybody has to understand that the child is sort of like a robot or a puppet. The child isn't really what the child is saying in terms of its hatred, doesn't really understand what it's saying, no matter how old the child is. In other words, they're being programmed to a very high extent. Alienation, and I say this frequently, is a form of adjustment for the child to live in that world of being in this polarized anger enmeshed world but it's another that's another
Okay,
conversation.
no, I don't think it is another conversation, Bob. I think actually you're getting to the heart of, so in RLT, we're always looking at our current behavior as a adaptation that we developed in childhood as a survival instinct, as the only way that we could have survived the situation that we had. So what I'm hearing is that this is an adaptation that a
Mhm.
child would have no choice but to go along with. This is the only way the child is going to feel safe and hold on to its only remaining
Right.
uh, parental figure, and so it will undermine its long-term best interest without understanding why, because it's trapped in a really a no-win situation. So, but I'm really wondering if you would say what seems to be true to me, but I'm not an expert in parental alienation from experience, is that like the child is somehow acting out the unresolved trauma of the parent who is leading the charge. The child is kind of caught up as an accessory to a parent's unresolved trauma. And that keeps going, through generation after generation after generation. Would that seem accurate to you?
Yeah, chances are the child then becomes what that parent needed as a survivor when they were a child. In other words, they were rejected, they felt worthless, they felt unwanted or unloved. So they take that vacuum of feelings of vacuum, and they put it to the child, so the child then can satisfy that for them. Okay, that's called an enmeshed relationship. And so the boundaries between those two people, the child and the alienating parent, become very blurred. Okay, to the satisfaction of the alienating parent, or the favorite parent, we refer to them as. um, and of course the child's not really fully aware of that at that stage of the game, but that's how they're going to grow up. Un Unresolved, no intervention, that child is going to grow up and basically learn how to be an adult. How'd they learn how to be adult? They learned it from their favorite parent.
Yeah. Well, and that's where you asked me earlier how I came to RLT. And one of the things that I noticed after my first marriage ended was that I was treating my, at that point, husband, before he became my ex-husband, with the same way that my mother treated my father. I didn't know any better. I thought that the way to get someone to do what you wanted them to do when they weren't was to was to criticize and complain and shame them and make them feel bad about themselves. That's all I had been exposed to. So I repeated that in my marriage. Now, in my current marriage, I totally approach that differently. And I know like there's three steps. I have to ask for what I want, but then I have to help my partner understand here's how to give me what I want. And then I have to really encourage him and make it easy for him to do that. It's a completely logical approach, but I had no awareness that I was operating under kind of like these scripts or under these automatic pilot behaviors that are set in childhood. And unless something intervenes, like you're saying, we're going to keep living that out. We're going to keep bringing that to our next relationships.
Bottom line is, how do you learn how to be an adult? How do you learn how to be a parent? You watch your parents, and how whatever they do, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what you do because that's what parents do. That's the only people you know that do that. And
Absolutely.
and so
Yes.
so let me go back to how RLT might support a targeted parent.
Okay. Well, I love where we just went because I will say that one of the main ways we look at RLT is we call it relational recovery, which is
Ah,
really, how do you learn to be a person who can act in a healthy way in a relationship? It's a recovery process. You're actually recognizing that you did not have this technology as you were going into the adult world and you now need to recover it. So, let's just talk about the points that I said before. In terms of feeling powerless and victimized with plummeting self esteem and feeling desperate, like that's a stance. We say if we think about the grid that I mentioned to you, it has a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. And we try to help people learn how to live in the center, not going up when they're triggered or going up into grandiosity or down into shame and collapse, and not going into boundarylessness, where you just mentioned there's no boundary between the parent and the child. So boundarylessness doesn't work in relationship, but going behind a wall doesn't work either. So our goal is to learn how we can keep ourselves at the center of that grid, no matter how other people are acting around us. So we ground ourselves in a feeling of self-worth that cannot go up or down depending on other people's behavior. We call that relational integrity. And we give our clients the opportunity to practice this in a number of ways so that when they're triggered in a regular relationship situation, they can recognize it happening and they can choose to bring themselves back to that center and only act from the center. That gives us such a sense of our own inherent worth and dignity because we cannot control the people around us, but we can certainly control how we react or respond to them.
it's going to make you more effective as
Well,
whether you're whatever position you're in or whatever your situation is in terms of your situation relative to alienation, whether you're in a court situation, whether you're in a mediation situation, whatever you're doing in that process, doing some of the things you're talking about, helping people with that would make them more effective.
well, and not only make them more effective, make them less likely to operate against their own
Uh,
long-term best interests.
well, that's the other side
So
of
I'm
that.
imagining that you've had a lot of situations where a client like is actually doing almost the things that are going to make the situation worse and not better, because that's what happens when we're outside of the center of the grid and what we call our adaptive child is running the show. Everything we do makes the things worse and not better.
One of the things I have to always do in testimony is explain to the court that the targeted parent is a human being and is going to screw up and make mistakes. They're going to do and say things that are not very helpful, that may be inappropriate, and may exacerbate the situation. The court needs to understand that this is a situational reaction as opposed to a state or a systemic situation with that person. They're not always angry and out of control. They're not always using expletives all the time. They're not always whatever. This is a reaction to what's going on. And the court needs to understand that and not hold that person's behavior within reason, not hold that person's behavior against them to the extent that if they didn't understand that, that they would.
Yeah, and I imagine that's not necessarily easy. I imagine that a lot of people in the system um, do not want to give the
Oh, no.
targeted parent any
The
kind of
benefit of the
absolution.
doubt. Right.
Yeah, the benefit of the doubt. So there is the you start out as a targeted parent, you start out with um, everything stacked against you, and the perspective uh, that you're not going to be behaving in an that
Rational.
well, what really is so upsetting as I'm thinking about this is the idea that if people accuse you of being something and you're desperate to prove that that's not true, um, that feeling inside of you is going to encourage you to act outside the boundaries of appropriate behavior.
Yeah, that's
It's a
but that
no-win situation.
and because many therapists, not all therapists, many therapists don't understand this phenomenon. So they start to either become an advocate for the child or the favored parent or both. And then in some cases, don't even talk to the targeted parent. They don't even meet with them, regardless of the allegations that either the parent or the child levy against that parent. Sometimes they don't even talk to them. And then they go to court and they become an advocate for the other side. And they don't really understand, they don't even know the truth. They're just going by one side of the story. And so the targeted parent is not only dealing with that situation, they're dealing with now the court has got it, a guardian ad litem has got the court's attention. They have a lot of authority in these cases. And if that guardian ad litem has sided with one of the sides, i.e., the favored parent, there's a real uphill battle for the targeted parent to overcome that. So
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about. And then that's where that behavior comes from, or that becomes the trigger, if you will, for that behavior.
yeah. Which means that it's not fair, but it becomes the responsibility of the targeted parent to have the strongest possible connection to themselves as they're going through this. I mean,
Right, right,
it's adding insult to injury to ask them to do so much work on themselves, but here's the only other side of that. um, when I work with people who are experiencing this, we have to redefine the point of all of it. We have to redefine success because it cannot be connected to outcome. It cannot be I must have my child back, otherwise I will never be able to feel whole and complete.
right.
That's just that's an impossible situation. Really want to encourage people to start to define success as how I show up in the world. That's going to be the whole point. How I show up in the world, no matter what anyone is accusing me of. How am I going to show up in the world so I can keep my dignity in place, so I can have my self-respect, so I can be a person who lives my highest values? That becomes the kind of the compass for all this work.
One of the sad things is without any kind of appropriate intervention, uh, Richard Rorschach, very famous, very well-known author in this field, he started back in 2015. He actually talked about the idea that on average, no intervention, it would take about 22 years for the alienated child to reunite with the targeted parent if they reunite. More recently, he's updated that to 27 years. Okay, and there are cases where it's even longer than that. Um, some of these targeted parents are looking at not having a relationship with their child either for extremely long periods or maybe never. How does RLT work with that?
Well, it's what I just said, although it certainly is not an easy thing for anyone to think about in the long term. So I prefer to have people think about it in the short term instead of the long term. Like, how are we going to go through this day by day? How are we going to like do this for the next day, week, month, year? Because we don't know. We have no power. So one of the most beautiful things then is that RLT has this conviction underneath that all the work that we do individually actually affects the intergenerational trauma field. So even if we're not able to talk to the child, the work that we're doing is somehow changing their psyche, changing their whole internal orientation. Um, because intergenerational trauma, according to Terry Real, he says something, I'm paraphrasing, intergenerational trauma rolls down a hill like a rock out of control, taking every new generation down with it until one person in one generation says stop. And we call that person a relational hero. So I refocus my clients from needing something to change in the outside world into I'm going to be the relational hero in my family. I'm going to embody this orientation toward myself where I hold myself in positive self-regard no matter how things are happening. And my calm and my peace and my sense of um, who I am in the world is so powerful and so strong that when and if conditions in the system shift, this child will recognize me for my safety, will recognize me for my wholeness, will recognize me for the grounded love that I offer. Um, that becomes the purpose. So then success is acting from integrity rather than reactivity, and this idea of growing the relational capacity, the idea that even if the bond is not available to you, it's still there. Like it might be invisible, but we have to know it's still there.
Mhm.
Uh, it's hidden, it's not accessible, but we can still add to it as we kind of hold it in our own nervous system, and that love still has a weight. Also, kind of having to zoom out, the sense of identity. I know that for people going through parental alienation, the focus on this happening every day becomes like a tunnel vision. It becomes like the most important thing about you is that you're going through this. So I try to help my clients zoom out, that their identity is bigger than parenthood. It's not the total definition of themselves. Therefore, we have to invest energy in other places. Otherwise, their whole sense of identity collapses. So we have to kind of add to that sense. Um, and this is a season. Like we said, we have to think of this as a marathon, not a sprint. We don't know when it's going to end. When we're traumatized, time feels like it's standing still on its own. We know that about trauma. And this is a relational trauma.
Mhm.
So on its own, time will feel like it's standing still. And then you add to it what you said about the court system. You have that exponential experience of this is never going to end. So the nervous system really needs to understand to stop waiting for it to end. We have to be able to like turn off the survival stress response, uh, because there is no official end. We have to be able to go day by day.
That almost sounded like concluding remarks. Really.
Well, those are some thoughts. I mean, I think if you want to say concluding remarks, I am really aware that people who are going through this need support. It saddens me when you like reinforce the idea that so many people who are going into therapist offices for this are going to meet someone who doesn't know anything at all about parental alienation.
I wish that was a rare event.
Yes, I wish it was too. I hope, and that's one of the things we even say just in relational life therapy, that most therapies are individually focused, that most people can go into a therapist's office with a problem in a relationship, only tell their side, and have the therapist kind of side with them and fall into the story that it's the other person's fault. So relational life therapy comes from the idea that we have to understand the system, we have to understand relationality. So right from the get-go, having a relational life therapist is someone who wants to see how the system is affecting what it is you're talking about.
Right.
But what do I want the people to know? Like your nervous system isn't broken. It's really overprotective. And of course it needs to be. This primal attachment response is going to make that happen. So if you're going into panic or rage or collapse, that's your body trying to keep you safe. We want to work with that part of you to teach you how to soothe it and let this other part of you that can sit in the center of that grid support you. And there's grieving. I don't think I mentioned the grieving. Obviously, that's the underlying of all of it, right? This grief that never seems to end. Um, and of course, we can't make the grieving go away and we can't make it go any faster. But people have to be able to grieve without losing their dignity, like being able to feel the pain and also self-respect at the same time feels
And,
like really crucial.
and maintain the hope. Because
Yes.
I'd like to also say that I believe that parents not having access to their child forever is a very rare event. I would like to think that as ineffective as court systems are, they at least recognize that children need both parents, and at some level they'll have access to the child. And maybe it'll take a longer a time for that child to heal so that they can have a functional relationship. But that I think that'll happen. I maintain the optimism that will happen.
So with that optimism is like, what do we do today, knowing that we don't know when that day is going to come? And the bottom line of RLT is all the work we do on ourselves is the best gift we can give to our children in any situation. So obviously in this situation, even more.
Right. Elyse, how can people get in touch with you?
My website is relationalempowerment.com. And it's easy to find me there. And I offer complimentary sessions to meet new people and see if we're a fit. So if anything we've said today seems to resonate, I would love to talk to you.
Very good. So thank you for spending this time with us. These conversations are honest and sometimes heavy because the reality of parental alienation can feel unbearable at times. But so can the love that refuses to die inside us. Our goal isn't to give quick fixes, it's to bring truth and empathy back into the same room. Remember, the way you speak to yourself, the calm you practice, the dignity you hold, these are acts of repair that ripple outward, whether you're a parent, a therapist, an attorney, a judge, or an advocate. You play a part in the changing of what's happening next. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Evans, and on behalf of Elyse Killoran and our team at NAOPAS, thank you for listening, for caring, and for believing that connection is still possible. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on this topic, please visit www.drbobevans.com or www.naopas.com. We offer classes for both legal and mental health professionals to help educate them on the signs and strategies of parental alienation and how to move forward for a healthier environment for the children of divorce. Please visit www.naopas.com and sign up for our courses and use coupon code PODCAST for a 50% discount.